Hi everyone, welcome to the Media Guy channel on YouTube. My name is Scott and welcome to What I've Been Watching, where I talk about what I've been watching. 4 movies this week and a TV show we'll talk about, so let's get started. The Little Things was the first movie by Warner Media that was dropped on both HBO Max and theaters on the same day. It stars 3 Academy Award-winning actors, Denzel Washington, Rami Malek, and Jared Leto, and was directed by John Lee Hancock. Denzel Washington plays a older, almost to retirement detective who joins a younger, hot-headed detective played by Rami Malek to investigate a serial killer who is played by Jared Leto. This movie is the movie Seven, all over again, but dumber. I am far from the first critic to point this out, but it has to be said, there's too many similarities between these two films for it to be coincidental. The Little Things cribs from Seven way too early and way too often for this to be an accident. But while The Little Things understands the broad strokes of Seven, it doesn't understand the details. The little things, if you will. It doesn't understand that Seven is a morality play wrapped up in a murder investigation, where this movie is just a murder investigation, pretending to have a morality play. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that play out beat for beat, like the movie Seven, but without any of the nuances that made Seven interesting. It has a late stage scene that's set in a bar, but Seven's bar scene is a scene where the 2 characters talk about the nuances of their views on the world. In The Little Things, the characters just talk about the X's and O's of the investigation. The finale of the movie takes place out in the middle of nowhere. But while it wants to crib that from Seven, it has no interest in the drive there, which is what sets up the intrigue of the final scene in Seven. It tries to do almost the exact same things beat for beat. I mean, the movies aren't carbon copies of each other, but the similarities are there. And this movie's not bad because Seven is good. This movie is bad because the steps it takes along the way don't add up to much. Jared Leto's character is weird and off-putting, but his reasons for killing all these women is never made clear within the running time. The 2 cops played by Denzel Washington and Rami Malek hit the beats they need to hit along its running time, but it doesn't add up to much. And while Seven was fine with having its characters end in a off-putting, uneasy place, this movie tries to wrap up everything in a bow, and it makes the ending of this film uninteresting and unsatisfying. As far as the acting in this film, you have 3 Academy Award-winning actors, and they do their best here with the material they're given. I would have liked to have seen all 3 of these actors in different roles. They play with type most of the time. I would have liked to see maybe Denzel be the bad guy or Rami Malek be the bad guy. We've seen Jared Leto play this kind of weirdo before. It would have been interesting to see him play against type and be maybe a cop this time. But yeah, this movie tries to crib way too much from a better film. And if you're going to have comparisons to a better film that has a screenplay which is perfect, and a director that put that movie together that is a master of his craft, you have to do something different that Seven didn't think of, and it just doesn't. It just does everything Seven did, but dumber. Gretel and Hansel is a 2020 retelling in a gothic horror style of the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. It was directed by Osgood Perkins, who is the son of Anthony Perkins. Stars Sophia Lillis, who you might have seen in the movie It, as Gretel. And this is somewhat of a feminist retelling of this fairy tale. She's very much the main character. Hansel is not in the movie all that much. It's mostly about Gretel's coming of age. And of all the fairy tales, I feel that Hansel and Gretel is kind of the fairy tale that would work best in this gothic style. The film is beautiful. It uses a very interesting, not quite Academy 4:3 aspect ratio, but it's a little wider than that. But it feels constricted without feeling too tight, and the movie's gorgeous throughout its running time. And Sophia Lillis is very compelling as Gretel. You really feel her struggles as she goes through the paces of the story. The movie isn't as strong for me in its 3rd act. The 3rd act kind of gets away from the gothic horror style and goes more into Lynchian territory. almost Lovecraftian. It goes into an area more of weird imagery for weird imagery's sake than in pure horror. And I feel like that third act didn't make its storylines add up to anything other than weirdness for weirdness sake. And that's where it all kind of falls apart for me. It's an interesting film. It's a well-acted film. It's a beautifully shot film. But I don't think it adds up to anything that will have me revisiting it in the future. Star Trek Beyond is the third movie in the current Star Trek franchise that stars Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, and Zachary Quinto, and Simon Pegg, Zoe Saldana, John Cho, and the late Anton Yelchin. This movie was directed by Justin Lin. And I don't know what it was about this movie. I think it was its first trailer. The first trailer for this film was absolutely terrible. It is one of the worst trailers I've ever seen. And it was off-putting enough that I always had it in my mind that this movie was a lesser Star Trek film. So I didn't really see it at the time because of that. And going into this, I knew that J.J. Abrams had left the project to go do Star Wars. So Justin Lin takes over, and he does a competent job putting this movie together. It has some interesting and cool-looking set pieces. But the plot for me is where it all falls apart. I had no interest in what was happening. For me, this series is at its best when Chris Pine and all of the cast are in one place together, quipping and having fun dialogue. And there's just not a lot of that in this movie. This movie is very much action-based, and it has a lot of the characters apart for those action sequences. And where Simon Pegg's character and Anton Yelchin's character were the highlights for me for the previous movies, this movie for me was all about Karl Urban. Bones was hilarious in the first two movies, and that is the case in this movie. He makes the movie better. Idris Elba plays the antagonist in this movie, and he's layered under a ton of just prosthetics and makeup. I don't think the antagonist is good in this movie. He's not compelling in any way, shape, or form. The screenplay, which was co-written by Simon Pegg, has its moments, but it's just not as snappy and fast as the other two films in this series. I don't find this movie to be very memorable. It's something that happened. I saw it. It's over. I don't think I'll ever revisit it. It just didn't have the energy that I enjoyed in the first two films in the series. And finally, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 slasher horror film classic directed by Tobe Hooper. This movie has long been on my list of movies to see. It's been on my shame list for a very long time, and it finally came up in streaming, so I checked it out. And yeah, I get it. This is an interesting film in that for the first hour or so, it's just this creeping tension that goes along. You have to look past some of the acting, which is bad. This is a very low-budget movie, and go into the atmosphere of this movie. It feels like it has this creeping horror that's just chasing you throughout the movie. The first act is very much establishing characters. The second act is where they start to get picked off one by one. And then the final 40 minutes is absolute chaos. That creeping tension of the first two acts explodes in the third act. And what struck me was how much it is sound-based. I think in the 2000s we've gotten used to very much quiet, loud horror. It's easy to startle someone. We talked about that when I watched Creep in 366 2020. This movie goes with a very interesting direction in that the chainsaw is very loud. If you're being chased by someone with a chainsaw, there's not going to be any quiet moments. It is just relentless sound for the last 40 minutes of this film. Part of that is the noise of the chainsaw. Part of that is that Leatherface is just relentless as a killer. You can shut a door in his face, you're going to hear the chainsaw, and he's going to start chainsawing through it. It's just non-stop. And when you get to the climactic dinner scene, it's just people yelling. It's just an audio onslaught. And it's very aggravating and tension-filled. It just made me feel gross inside. I remember seeing movies like this that they really promoted it based on being banned in a lot of countries. This movie is no exception. But I see why it has the popularity that it does, because it's very effective for being so low budget, and it's very effective in a different way than the horror films we see today. Unless you're watching David Bruckner Ty West films, which I do. Finally, the TV shows I've been checking out this week. I didn't finish the British show that I talked about last week. It had one more episode than I thought it had, so I'm going to try to knock that out tonight. We'll talk about it next week. I did check out the Christmas special for Doctor Who, though. And yeah, I liked it. I think that Chris Chibnall has brought a visual aesthetic to the show. The show looks great for the most part. The special effects seem to be kicked up a notch, and the film grading just looks great on this version of Doctor Who. I like the Dalek storyline they went with in this special. Had some Dalek on Dalek violence, which was always fun. And it's always good to see Captain Jack back. And I guess this could be considered a spoiler, so skip this, mute it for a couple seconds. I'll clap my hands when you can unmute. I'm glad they're jettisoning 2 of the companions for this Doctor. I never thought I had the affinity for Graham and Ryan that I did until they decided to leave. And when that happened, I kind of felt sad, which is weird because I never thought I connected with them at all. But I'm glad they're prying down the companions just because I felt like this show was a little busy. And the family aesthetic they were trying to establish was kind of antithetical to what Doctor Who was. And I think they figured that out towards the end of the last series. There were points at the end of the last series where they figured out something that David Tennant was very good at that they hadn't had in this version of the Doctor. And that is, the Doctor's kind of a dick sometimes. And towards the end of this last series, they had a couple scenes where Jodie Whittaker's Doctor talked down to the companions and put them in their place. It is a family aesthetic, but there is a solid figurehead. And getting rid of the 2 of the companions and putting them in a place where they can be happy outside of the realm of the Doctor, I feel will make the show stronger, going back to the one companion dynamic. So yeah, I enjoyed the Christmas special, and I look forward to what they're going to do with the next series. I've also been watching the last series of The Amazing Race. I've been catching up on that. It's weird to watch in something that was shot in a pre-COVID, pre-social distancing world. The one thing I've noticed about this season of the show that I don't think I noticed about the other seasons of the show is the omnipresence of the camera people. In prior seasons, they've done a very good job of hiding the production staff. This time around, they're very visible, and it makes me feel bad for them that they have to keep following these idiots around, especially as they make dumber and dumber mistakes. They have to keep trotting back and forth, shooting these people. Makes me feel bad for them, but it's still an entertaining show. It's very much a travel log. It's very entertaining in that respect, and it gets you to see parts of the world that you might not see otherwise. But I'm looking forward to watching the rest of the season throughout the week. And I've also been watching the HBO original documentary series, The Lady in the Dale. If you don't know about this, it's about a car that was made in the late 1970s that was said to have 70 miles to the gallon capabilities. It was a 3-wheeled car. It was created by a woman named Liz Carmichael, and that's where I'm going to leave it. It was a bit of a scam, and there were people arrested because of this. It's a documentary series. I think it has 6 parts on HBO. It's airing right now. The first 2 aired this week. There's another one that airs. This is Sunday. It'll air tonight. Pretty interesting stuff. And I think I said, what? Like 2 or 3 times in the first minute of the show. Has some storylines that I did not expect. But I'm going to get back to it. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next week.